So today I wanted to try something a little bit different. Now, a lot of the time on the channel, what I'll do are list style videos, right? Where I'm talking about either recent pickups or games that are on the horizon, or just genre specific showcases of a lot of different games that happen to fit into a particular niche. And I love making videos like this just because it lets me kind of buffet style hop around a bunch of different games, but at the same time, there's really only so much that I can convey in a video. Whether I'm filming the Steam Deck directly to give an idea of what the handheld experience is like, or just showing captured gameplay footage, no matter how well I try to describe what's happening on screen, it's not the same thing as if you actually get your hands on it and actually get to play it for yourself. So that's what today's video is all about, is I wanted to highlight just a bunch of demos for games that are coming up soon that I thought would be fun for you to go ahead and explore, because I've certainly had a blast with every game on this list, and it's got me very excited for some stuff that's coming down the pike immediately, or maybe in the indeterminate future depending on the game that's on offer. But for starters, let's just go ahead and jump in with a low poly horror game that I'm very excited about based on my time with the demo, and that is Heartworm. In Heartworm, you'll be playing as a girl named Sam. After going down a rabbit hole in the web about a mysterious house that can bridge the worlds of the living and the dead, you set off to investigate, and in short order, you'll be piecing together clues to see if there's any truth to the internet rumors. And naturally, you'll be doing your best to survive as you're plunged deeper and deeper into more and more unsettling environments. I've had my eye on this game for a while, chiefly because anything that recreates the look and feel of the original Resident Evil is definitely going to pique my interest, but having now played it, I'm especially excited for whenever it gets its full release. Not just because they got the aesthetics right, but they also play on some familiar mechanics of classic horror games in interesting new ways. Sure, you'll find a soothing save room, enemies that are best avoided rather than confronted, and sparse resources to help you along the way, but you'll also find a lot of refreshing touches in Heartworm that are really helping it to feel like more than just a retro horror throwback. In one area, I was trapped with a nearby enemy, which normally I would just run past, having played a fair amount of survival horror games, except that in this particular area I was treading through waist-high water, which disabled Sam's ability to run. And I love this because it took the fundamental act of movement in a survival horror game with tank controls and a fixed camera environment, and then it dropped in another layer of tension that would up the challenge even for seasoned veterans of the genre. It's an intriguing story so far that has a solid grasp of the fundamentals of horror's earliest standouts, and it just feels like a game that's being made by a real fan who's paid very close attention to the details of the genre. Now, there were a couple of things that I took issue with in Heartworm, namely that the loading screens between rooms felt like they took way too long to load, which I get that aesthetically it is definitely period accurate and feels like Resident Evil, but that doesn't make it less of a drag when you have to double back through a couple of these doors when you're out of inventory space. Also, I wasn't real clear on the function of Sam's camera. I feel like the intention here is that it does damage in the style of Fatal Frame, but the few times I used it I couldn't tell if it was really doing damage to an enemy or if I was only meant to stun them with it, and even then it didn't seem to do much. But nonetheless, it plays solidly on the Steam Deck, and considering it's not due out until next year, there should be plenty of time for the developer to iron things out based on user feedback, and even in its current state, it's a really fun experience. Overall, I'd say it feels more like a throwback to Silent Hill than Resident Evil though, what with a more abstract setting and mood, so if you're into a more psychological take on horror, I think that's what the dev is going for here. Moving on, if Heartworm feels more like a throwback to Silent Hill, this next game definitely feels like a throwback to Resident Evil, or perhaps more appropriately the 2002 remake of Resident Evil, and that is Echoes of the Living. Now, I touched on this demo back in February and decided I would drop back in on it just to see if there were any major changes since the last time I played it, and also because then my first go around I played as Laurel, and this time I wanted to play as Liam to see if the demo played out much differently. Now, the setup is shamelessly familiar here. Taking place in a small quiet town after a mysterious fog has descended, the inhabitants start turning into zombies, and then it'll be up to you as either Laurel Reeves or Liam Oakwood to sort out what's going on. Playing as Liam this time, I didn't notice any significant differences between how it starts off playing as Laurel. Both will throw you into the action pretty abruptly, and the only change I could really see was your starting position in the city after the demo kicks off. Although I was very happy to discover an Easter egg that I'm pretty sure I just completely glossed over the first time I checked out this demo, and I found it here in this bathroom stall, which is a pretty blatant reference to James from Silent Hill 2, and examining the toilet produced what I think is a more subtle nod to Heather in Silent Hill 3. Beyond that, it played exactly as great as it did the first time I checked it out back in February. Movement is solid, and the fixed camera perspectives are well framed to produce maximum tension as you try to suss out whether that groan from a pack of zombies is just ambiance or if it's a legitimate threat that's just lumbering toward you from just out of view. Deck performance is mostly solid, though the frame rate doesn't stay at a consistent 60. Still, it's totally playable, and I had a blast piecing together its environmental puzzles and doubling back to previously locked areas with new threats popping up. It's still a little rough around the edges, but at this point I'm guessing Moonglint are working really hard to hit their release window of Q4 of this year, and this will be a day one purchase for me if the final product even comes close to what I've experienced in the demo so far. Now, this next game is releasing in just over a month, and I have already played the demo for it, albeit on the PS5, and this is the first time I've gotten to play it on the Steam Deck, and I'm happy to report that it performed really well there, and that is Lies of P. Now, the running joke here is that the devs got sick of waiting for Bloodborne 2 and figured, hey, why not just go ahead and make our own spin on it with this dark reimagining of Pinocchio? And as a concept, I think this could have gone really badly or just come off super cheesy, but so far it looks incredibly promising. Those familiar with the Souls formula will immediately feel right at home with all of the features that you'd expect. Catching a rest at a Stargazer, which is their version of a bonfire, lets you level up with Ergo, which serves as both currency and a means of bumping up your stats. And you can focus your build around speed, strength, or a balance of both. Enemies respawn when you die or take a rest, and you'll be navigating all manner of puppet horrors while dodging, parrying, and managing your stamina from moment to moment. It's all great fun if you crave the punishment of FromSoft games, but it puts some unique twists on the formula as well. For instance, you'll have to manage P's weapon durability by periodically doing weapon repairs between battles, and thankfully if your health flask runs out of charges, you can slowly replenish it as you dish out more and more damage in combat. I really appreciated this because when things look dire, you can squeak out another charge to keep fighting, and continue to carefully explore your environment rather than just panic and just start running past enemies to look for another bonfire or, well, Stargazer. Earlier this year, I was really excited that we had no less than 3 different good-looking Souls-likes that were dropping, those being Thymesia, Steel Rising, and now Lies of P. And the former 2 were good, but lacking in some key areas for me, but Lies of P looks like it's going to be the best of the bunch, particularly when it comes to polish. And surprisingly, it runs at or near 60 on the deck pretty easily. I was expecting, based on the gorgeous environments, that this was going to take a pretty significant dive, and while it's a little muddy on the Steam Deck, it runs really well, and I got completely absorbed revisiting it, and just highly recommend giving it a play if you're a fan of the genre, especially considering it's right around the corner on the release calendar. Alright, now let's lighten things up a little bit with a game that is super colorful, but honestly one that I would have completely ignored because I'm just not very familiar with the genre, or maybe more appropriately, it's not the genre that I'm not familiar with, but the sport, and that would be WrestleQuest. So just seeing the cover of this game, again, I probably would have just completely ignored it because I am not a wrestling fan. Or I guess more specifically, I'm not really a modern wrestling fan. It's not that I don't have a great deal of respect for wrestling, I definitely do, but the last time I was really into wrestling, I was about 6 years old when my grandpa used to be really into watching it, so I grew up watching like Hulk Hogan, Undertaker, Sergeant Slaughter, Jake the Snake, I'm trying to think like other wrestlers now, but surprisingly, a lot of these wrestlers are definitely represented in WrestleQuest. And that's kind of what started to make WrestleQuest really appealing to me is when I started getting into the demo, is that tons of wrestling icons are either referenced or just to make a direct appearance in it, so it was kind of nostalgic for me seeing some legends from my childhood just popping up on screen. From a gameplay perspective, WrestleQuest is unique because it takes the mechanics of wrestling and turns them into an RPG adventure, and the moves, gimmicks, and abilities that you would find in wrestling translate remarkably well to a turn-based RPG. It kind of reminded me of the first time I played Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga, weirdly enough, and battling it out was fun, switching up attacks, taunts, and pin attempts, all while hyping up the crowd. The whole thing plays out in a top-down pixel art style when you're navigating the overworld, and a traditional side view like you'd see in a lot of RPGs from that era, and so far it looks like it's coming together really well. And while I personally won't be able to point out every reference in this game as Muchacho Man strives to ascend to wrestling greatness, I'm sure people who live and breathe wrestling will find something to enjoy here, even if it is a big departure from the gameplay you'd normally see in a wrestling game. Deck performance is naturally solid as a 2D affair, and you should be able to get a lot of battery life out of this one too when it finally drops proper on August 8th. And finally, this last one is outrageously charming, and I really loved it, but I also kind of hate that I have to wait until 2024 to play the actual release for it, and that is Little Kitty, Big City. So Stray was one of my favorite games of 2022, and after I finished it, I started looking around for what other cat-based games I could play. And while I did end up making a video about cat games, and there were some fun ones on that list, like Cat Quest or Cats Organized Neatly, I really didn't find another cat game in the vein of Stray that really let you control a cat with the same sort of actions and grace you'd expect. But Little Kitty Big City does exactly that, and in some ways even better than Stray does. The setup is pretty straightforward. You're a cat who falls from your napping spot just outside of the window of a very tall building, and your goal is to get back home. Along the way, you'll meet other animal friends who dole out various quests and offer some helpful insights into navigating the big city. But what really grabbed me about this one is how well it captured the mechanics of being a cat. You can swat stuff, trip up humans to get whatever they drop, pounce on birds, and of course there's a dedicated meow button. But I think what stood out to me most is how well it handles jumping. In Stray, you would sort of point towards where you would want to jump, and your cat would leap pretty magnetically and land without issue in most instances for platforming. But in this game, you have to be a little bit more deliberate and direct the arc to where you think your cat can land, and you won't always hit the mark. So it's a little bit more difficult, and in turn each environment becomes maybe less cinematic than Stray, but more challenging too, as it really does come off more purely as a platformer. It starts out pretty slow at first, with you figuring out how to get to the next part of the city from a courtyard, and cracks open fast, introducing new furry and feathered friends to interact with, and in turn even more actions that you can take, like crouching, pouncing, or dashing with a dedicated zoomies button. The dialogue is really fun as well, and the whole thing comes together like an amalgamation of the mechanics of Stray, the presentation of Untitled Goose Game, and the self-awareness of Donut County. Performance is playable, but not perfectly smooth at this point, as the frame rate was kind of all over the place, even after I bumped the graphics down to its lowest setting. But honestly, I was having such a good time just exploring the world that I was in that at no point did I really notice it in any significant way, which kind of makes sense considering this is a lighter weight platformer and not like a hardcore action game or anything. Long story short, I went in not really expecting much, but ultimately I had a total blast in my short time with the demo, and definitely recommend it because I will certainly be keeping an eye out for the full release whenever it drops, if for no other reason than just to see how many cute little cat hats I can collect. Alright, so that's it for this one, and honestly this one was a little bit harder to make than I thought it was going to be because it was not very easy for me to track down, really good demos in the Steam store for games that were upcoming. I think I was just really bad at navigating it, but after a little bit of detective work, these are the games that I settled on. So hey, what about you? Are there any demos out there that I missed that you think should have been included on this list? If so, please let me know in the comments below. As always, thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to watch stuff on this channel. It means a ton to me. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye.